Welcome back. We're talking about news writing today, and you're going to ask, well, why have we got a sports story up on the screen? We do because sports is a good way to think about how to do summary in a proper way and how to do it in a way that doesn't meet the needs of the person who comes to a news source for a summary. And summary is what news writing is. I'll tell you what I mean. So let's say you went to the Rockies game, and the next day, someone who didn't go and didn't see it, didn't read about it, asked you what happened. You would likely say, well, the Rockies won 9-4, and that might be as much information as this person wanted. Maybe you would say it was their second win in a row. They're doing better. Person might say, well, how'd they do it? And you might say, well, no, Nolan Arenado hit a couple of home runs. Finally, they had good pitching, and that may have been the end of the discussion. Uh, Meaning you had met the needs of a consumer of information who had sought out information from you. Now, let's just say instead of that, he said, well, on the first pitch, it was a ball. The second pitch was a strike. And the second pitch was a foul tip, right? And the third pitch was a ball. And then the fourth, and well, by the time you got to the fourth pitch, the person who asked, so what happened last night, would have said, oh, I'm sorry, gotta go, bye bye. Because you had not done the job of a reporter. You had not made some choices about telling this person what happened. Okay. Because literally what happened was they threw a pitch, then they threw another pitch, another one. Finally it was hit, was caught. Well, you know. Now let's imagine that you were here in 1963. You were in this crowd, and when Martin Luther King spoke at the March on Washington, and someone asked you who had not seen it on television, had not been there, well, what happened? Would you have said, well, there were a whole bunch of people there, and there were a few people who got up on the steps and they spoke, and there was a rabbi that spoke, and a pastor who spoke, and a senator who spoke, and another senator, and Martin Luther King spoke, and somebody else spoke. Of course, the person who asked that question probably would have excused his or herself before you got to the point that Martin Luther King spoke. And even saying that would not have given the person the information that he or she was seeking. So how would you have summarized the moment? I imagine you would have started out by discussing the crowd. Oh man, this was the most amazing crowd you've ever seen. People of all colors coming from across the country to support civil rights. It was amazing. But I guess the most dramatic moment was when Martin Luther King spoke. He had this line, I have a dream. And I swear, they're going to be quoting this speech as long as we live and long after it. I mean, you'll be able to go and look in books at the library and find this speech. That's how incredible it was. Yeah, I mean, if someday they invent something called the internet, you'll be able to find that speech with one click. I guarantee it. Every time he said, I have a dream, the electricity in that audience went up. It was amazing. Now, you would have given this person a real taste of what was important from the audience, all or from the event. All the other speakers and trappings would have just sort of melted away because of what was truly transformative was that moment with King speaking to that audience, and that's why we relive it today. So, yeah, back to sports. The reason I like to think about sports writing is in relation to bad news writing. Is one time I judged a high school journalism contest, the sports writing category, and I saw some really bad sports writing, and I saw stories that even though they had the score in the first couple of sentences. Right after that, it was in the first inning, the Badgers and the Snowbirds didn't score. And in the second inning, it remained scoreless. And in the third inning, well, that's not the way people want to read. They don't want to hear about stuff that did not uh, contribute to the climax or the big moment. The big moment might have happened in the eighth inning or the ninth inning. That's the way you summarize. You choose as a writer. So we're talking about the basics of news writing. That's really the most basic rule. We call it burying the lead. When we put the most important information so far down into the story that someone has to wade through a lot of information to get to what's most important, how the Snowbirds won the game. Um, this all leads itself to this concept, the inverted pyramid. If you imagine a pyramid, you imagine an inverted pyramid, you imagine the most important or the biggest thing in the story up high, okay, up at the top. And that's the function of news writing. Now, understand that news writing has changed with the advent of all the other means of competing for to provide information. So it's true that a lot of news stories follow are less acutely formed like an inverted pyramid. They're more feature-ish. But the fact is that if it's a news story, in the first 3 or 4 paragraphs, you will have known all the most important elements, and you the what they call the 5 Ws um, would be met: who, what, where, when, and why. Okay. Um, that doesn't mean they're necessarily in the first paragraph or in the lead, but the reason that this is so important is because of this consideration for newspapers. We want to offer small bites relative to the time that readers can allot to get the information that they want. Okay, we realize that some readers are strapped for time. They have to rush off to work or whatever, so we want to give them as much information as possible. Um, Fundamentally, a headline meets that criteria right there. Now, when we talk about appetites, when we purchase a newspaper, we know what type of information we're expecting to get. If a consumer purchases a magazine, that person knows that, or it's sort of implied that that person will set aside the time to read longer analyses with smaller, and not necessarily the same small bites. Small bites, well, if you've been acclimated to the essay style paragraph, that's not what a newspaper paragraph is. Newspaper paragraph basically is each separate thought, each quotation separated. It's very different from the essay style. Um, but yeah, those are some key elements. The most important information at the top, small bites. I want you to take a look at a newspaper article and see how paragraphs are handled. In fact, we'll be doing something with that in class. All right. Okay, well, let's talk now about um, the press release. The press release is basically your attempt to provide a news story to a newspaper. And what do you need to do to get a press release in a newspaper? You need to do 2 things. You need to know 2 audiences. The most important audience to know about is the editor, the person with whom you're going to work, the person who might be putting your information in the newspaper. And then you need to think about the other audience, and that's the people out there in the readership. Now, when I say the first audience, it means if you're going to send a press release to the newspaper, find out the name of the editor who handles these things. Call the newspaper and say, I have a press release. To whom would I address it? Get the name of the person, okay? Provide a contact information and those things. And then write something that everybody in the community, everybody in the readership would want to read. Not for the not just to put names of people in the press release for their ego gratification. I swear I've received press releases that did all sorts of stuff like give the name of whoever provided the Jello dessert, who recited the Pledge of Allegiance at a meeting. No, no, no. Forget it. It's not going to get in the newspaper. Don't do it. The ideal press release is the one that, after you've written it, it's short enough and it's got enough information, pertinent information to all the readers, that it goes in the paper without the editor having to rewrite it, cut things out of it, and all that. We'll be doing an exercise in that as well, and we will talk about it. These are two important things, and the most important thing about in doing a press release is doing this. All right. Talk to you again